Hello. So, for the homelessness and the tiny house thing, because it's so new, I'm finding a scholarly article on it specifically is going to be really tough. So, what we do in scholarship is we look for precedents. Who's done something like this before? So, for example, in LA, they passed. I think they passed an ordinance where you can have a travel trailer like a camper, and you can have that be temporarily licensed for camping on the street. But an unintended outcome, and literally that's kind of like a tiny home if you think about it, although like a flimsy, very temporary one. It's not very well insulated, and there's all sorts of issues with it. But be that as it may, that's kind of a precedence for the idea of a tiny home. Something that costs less than a typical family unit or whatever you wanted to describe it as. So we might look at things like that. How would you go about that, though, is what I'm going to show you. Another one would be, just like camping. So in Utah, in Salt Lake specifically, there was a local ordinance passed for temporary allowing camping in a very strictly defined area of Salt Lake City. I can't remember where that was. That's being experimented with now. So what we can do is we can look at precedents of less expensive housing. So that might be camping, might be sleeping rough and making it allowed in the law, or it might be any number of different ideas. And tiny houses is kind of one of the latest ones. Interestingly enough, there is a tiny house like village close to Westminster University on 13th East. And I forget the name of it, but it was an experiment with very small houses. I think in the 1930s, maybe in the 20s. And it still exists, but it's kind of fascinating. The criteria for housing is described by banks and local zoning boards of how big or small a house can be. And so a tiny house is merely just a different definition of that. So it could be like real estate zoning and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that we could look at. How do you find that? First of all, if you're going out on the open web, um, so for example, I don't want to go to Google Maps. I want to just go to Google. Oh Lord, I broke Google. I just want to go to that Google interface so I could show you a contextual search. I want the big search. There we go. Okay, so something you can do to look for ideas or keywords for precedents is you could do homelessness, and then what after you type on that, you would find precedents for it in other places. So tiny house, it's going to look for tiny house in the context of homelessness, and you're going to be able to see, are there other places in other cities looking at this? So like the Bay Area, um, and then here's the Salt Lake Tribune. But you could also look up zoning. Oh Lord, it must be the end of the day. Zoning laws. So you can see how 2022. So can you change what a shelter is described as? So during the pandemic, my local library they were closed, and I think they moved someplace else, but the building was still there, and so they rezoned it so homeless um, persons could be housed there temporarily. And then, like, what does temporary mean? All sorts of different things like that. So you can gather keywords like that. Ooh, another one is Bard. Have you ever heard of Google Bard? That's where you can type in questions like, what are interventions for homelessness in the concept in like real estate? And Bard might. So for one example, it gave me one out of Reddit. For another one, it gave me out of articles. So let's look at the articles. If you go to the library homepage, libutah.edu, the library catalog is kind of a general search that looks at many different databases. So there's like ebooks and scholarly articles, there's movies and things like that. So we can look for scholarly articles here. So you can see there's different lines that you can put in keywords, and we can do different names for it. So this is not a smart search. It only looks at the words that you're putting in there. Oh, it looks like I've done this one before. So I don't know if it's homeless or homelessness. That is a named issue or problem that people are working on, but it could also be the name of things like shelter or sleeping rough or tiny houses and things like that. Or it could be a population. But let's stick with homeless or homelessness. Tiny house. So if it's more than one word in your keywords, you have to put it into quote marks so those two stick together. Houses or tiny homes. It sounds tragically adorable, tiny homes, but it's the rhetoric changes. When you click on search for those, I don't know what I'm going to get, but I want to find stuff in the scholarship. So I'm starting specifically with tiny houses, but I might have to expand out to other forms of shelter. Yeah, there's only 411, but there might be a lot. Look at that. But for scholarly articles, I want to find somebody who's gone out and done as objective as possible research so I can look at their data and it might be reproducible. For that, I would have to look into scholarly and peer-reviewed journals. So there's only 19. But at the same time, there's 19. So there's a lot. This isn't all the scholarly articles. Again, it's kind of like a general search. But I think 19 is a great number for what we're looking for. So there's geography that this is coming out of. There's a journal of urban planning. These are all really good. Technical communication. That's fascinating. Insulating tiny homes. Social justice. There's all these different things. Which is the right article? It's the one that you think fits in your paper the best. So there's no right answer to this. You're constructing an argument and you use these sources as evidence for whether it would be feasible economically, environmentally, or socially, something like that. So let's take a look at this one, for example. I had no idea that this was so prevalent. I thought it was just Utah and LA that were experimenting with this. But if you find one, here's one, homeless persons in Missouri. So this would be a case study where they're looking at an experiment that's done in another place. You would just click on the red title. Whoops, I clicked too far to the right. And it will open up where you can see the abstract and metadata, but not the article itself. To see the article itself, you click on this full text available. There's another link to online right here. If you find something that you can't get full text access to, just send me an email. But on this one, it'll give you a list of journals to go into. If it says no full text available, you can just email me at this point. But there's a lot of different database vendors, so it might look different depending on where you go. And you should get access to a full text PDF. So let's see if that appears. While I'm waiting for that, oh no, there we go, PDF full text. I want to see that. I'm nervous that this is not going to be in English language, that we just got a Google translated abstract. But it's about Missouri. We'll find out. Why did they put the abstract in different languages? Oh no, it's in English. Okay, here's how a scholarly article works. It's very black and white. There's no color. There's no typically no photographs of the authors or anything smiling. You can typically see who the author is, and you can typically go down and you can see where they're working from. So this is somebody who's working at Missouri State University. They're going to have the abstract, which is going to be a summary of their findings and suggestions of what the evidence gave them. And so if you can read that and go, oh yeah, that looks really interesting, then you'll know to pick that article. If it doesn't make sense, skip it. Some people are bad writers. And they even talk about NIMBY. So there's an extra keyword for you. Not in my backyard. So people are like, yeah, homeless shelter would be great. you're going to put it next to my house? They're like, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that. So there's a concept that you might talk about. The introduction. Oh, cool. Here's a list of all the cities that have taken measures to create villages in tiny homes to address homelessness. That's something you could put into your paper and then cite this article. So sometimes you might just grab one little tiny piece of evidence. It doesn't have to be a big solution sort of a thing. What they will do is they will talk about precedents, so kind of like a lit review, but then later into the paper they'll start getting into maybe demographic data, maybe all these other things about populations and other quotes and things like that. If you don't get into the first page or so and find something, then that's where you would move on to another article. This is so exciting that there's so much on this topic. Most of these databases will have a citation generator, so you don't have to come up with a citation. It'll generate automatically for you, and you just cut and paste. They're usually wrong, so you have to do a couple of corrections. So for this one, the title needs to be in sentence case. So most of these would be lowercase letters. You can ask me about that if you want, but sentence case is the rule for APA. So cruise through these and look for different angles on how they're looking at the tiny house movement. That one looked at the people who are living near it, so that not in my backyard. Another one might be about how people feel. So they're interviewing homeless people. Another one might be the politics of it. So here's like insulating, so that's very practical. Is a welcome place to be? That's so cool. Okay, let me know how it goes, and I'm happy to help. If there's something you can't get access to, let me know and I'll track it down for you.